Mystica. Real documented mysteries, officially recorded, still unresolved, never explained, still classified. A young woman steps into an elevator, looks into the hallway, and hits buttons, like she's trying to escape something. The last known footage is public, and it ends without an explanation. If the record stops there, what happens in the missing minutes? We're not doing rumors tonight. We're only following what's documented in reports, statements, and official findings. And we're asking why some deaths get closed, while the questions stay open. In these cases, the mystery isn't a ghost story. The mystery is the mismatch between timelines, injuries, and what the paperwork claims happened. So let's start with one detail. The record can't make you unsee, because when a case closes, the wording matters. Accidental, suicide, undetermined. Those labels shape what gets investigated next. And sometimes they shut doors before the public can even see the full file. One more rule before we begin. If something is disputed, we'll say it's disputed, and we won't turn suspicion into certainty. But we will track what's verified and what never got answered. Now, Case 1 begins in Los Angeles, inside a hotel that would later become a headline all by itself. A Canadian student named Elisa Lam is reported missing in early 2013, and police later release elevator video tied to the search. The footage becomes the first crack in the timeline. In the video, she steps in and out, gestures with her hands, and appears to look for someone outside the frame. That behavior is visible on the recording. But the why behind it is not in the file the public sees, and that gap becomes the entire case. After she vanishes, guests report issues that push the search in a specific direction. Complaints about water pressure and taste are widely reported in connection with the days before her body is found. And that detail links an everyday problem to a death investigation. Her body is later discovered in a rooftop water tank. That's a documented fact, and it's a location that immediately raises access questions, because roofs have locks, alarms, and barriers that aren't supposed to be casual. The official conclusion is commonly reported as accidental drowning. Public reporting also ties the case to mental health considerations and an autopsy that did not announce a homicide. But closure on paper doesn't close the questions people keep asking. Here's the first unanswered hinge point: how she got to the roof, when she got there, and what she did between the last footage and the tank are not fully reconstructed in public. And when a timeline can't be rebuilt, doubt fills the space. Another hinge point is the tank itself. Discussions around whether it was open or closed, and when it was accessed, have varied in public accounts over the years. So if even basic details drift, what else might be missing? Look closely at what officials can prove versus what they infer. They can document discovery, tests, and conclusions, but they can't replay the minutes no camera captured. And that's where closed can still feel unsatisfying. Now, step back and treat the record like evidence, not a story. A case can be ruled accidental, even if the public can't picture the route, because the standard is based on findings, not imagination. But the imagination problem still matters, because it's how people detect contradictions. So what's the contradiction people return to? The elevator video looks like fear or confusion, but that's an interpretation, not a fact. And when interpretation becomes certainty, the case gets rewritten. The more careful question is simpler. What documented events do we have, and where do they stop? Because the stop point is the true mystery, not the theories. And this brings us to the broader pattern. When authorities close a death, they often close it at the edge of what can be proven. But families don't live at the edge. They live in the blank space after. Now, case 2 begins with a disappearance that turned into an undetermined label instead of a clean answer. Ray Rivera disappears in Baltimore in 2006, and he's later found near the Belvedere Hotel. The official manner of death is widely reported as undetermined, and that word carries weight. Undetermined doesn't mean nothing happened. It means the evidence can't support one clear story over the others. And that kind of closure can feel like a door half shut. The documented facts people cite are striking. There was a hole in a roof area, and personal items like a phone and glasses were reportedly found nearby. And when items appear relatively intact, people question the physics. But people question is not proof of a different cause. It's a signal that the record didn't resolve how the scene fits together. And when a scene doesn't fit, families keep pushing. Here's what matters in a case like this. The timeline of his last confirmed movements is not something the public can independently verify without full records. So, public understanding depends on summaries, not raw data. Summaries can be accurate, but they can also be incomplete. A single missing detail, like exact access points, exact roof conditions, or exact witness times, can change the entire logic. And that's why undetermined cases linger. Then there's the human factor. When a case doesn't produce charges, resources shift, leads cool, and the investigation narrows. And closed can start to mean inactive, even when the questions are active. This is where families often hit a wall. They're told there's no clear evidence of a crime, but they also can't get a satisfying narrative from the file. And they're left deciding whether to accept uncertainty or fight it. Now, there's a trap we have to avoid. A confusing scene is not automatically a conspiracy, and an undetermined ruling is not automatically a cover-up. But the record still owes the public clarity about what was tested and what wasn't. So the right question isn't who did it. The right question is, what would have to be true for the official outcome to fit the documented facts? And if that list is long, skepticism grows. That brings us to the third case, where the label is more definitive, but the public dispute is louder. Tamla Horsford dies in Georgia in 2018 after a gathering at a home, and the case is publicly reported as being closed without criminal charges. The family has publicly questioned the conclusion, and that conflict defines the story. The documented headline is often described as a fatal fall. Reports commonly describe injuries consistent with blunt force trauma, and authorities concluded an accidental scenario. But the family's concern is whether the investigation answered the timeline questions. Timelines are where these cases break. Who saw what when they saw it, and how those statements align with physical evidence is what decides everything. And when timelines conflict, trust collapses. In disputed closures, small details become massive. A phone call time, a door location, a distance from a fall point, even the wording of a witness statement can shift interpretation. And that's why public records matter, because they freeze those details in ink. Families often request reinvestigation or outside review. Sometimes agencies do review and still find no basis for charges, which is also part of the public record. But even that can feel like the system confirming itself. So what do we do with a case like this, ethically? We don't accuse people without evidence, And we don't turn grief into entertainment. But we also don't pretend. A closed file is the same as a resolved question. Here's the common thread across all three. Each case has a moment where public attention focuses on one disturbing detail, like a video, a scene that doesn't fit, or a timeline that shifts. And after that moment, the record either can't or won't fill in the rest. Authorities work with standards, burdens of proof, and limited resources. They can't keep every case open forever, especially without new evidence. But families experience closure as a decision, not a discovery. Now let's talk about what inconsistencies really mean. Sometimes it's error, sometimes it's missing data, and sometimes it's two honest accounts that can't both be correct. And when those inconsistencies remain in the final report, people feel erased. Autopsies add another layer. They can identify cause of death, but not always manner, motive, or the full sequence of events. And when toxicology, injuries, and timelines don't align cleanly, the label can become a compromise. This is why careful language matters. No signs of foul play can mean no evidence was found. Not that foul play is impossible. And that single phrase is where many cases quietly close. So here's a method you can use as a viewer. Separate what is directly documented, like dates, findings, and official statements, from what is inferred by the public. And if you keep those buckets separate, the mystery becomes clearer. Ask 3 questions in every case. What is the last verified moment? What is the first verified moment after the gap? And what evidence bridges the two? And if the bridge is weak, the record has a hole. Also, look for what was tested. Were digital records analyzed? Were locations forensically processed? Were statements cross-checked? Were alternative scenarios evaluated? And if the file doesn't say, you don't get to assume it was done. Now, the uncomfortable truth. Some deaths are explainable in principle, but unexplainable in documentation, because the key data never existed or was never preserved. And that's how mysteries survive in modern paperwork. That's also how families end up doing investigations themselves. They collect timelines, push for records, raise funds, and ask journalists to look again. And in many cases, the search becomes the only form of justice they can reach. So when you hear case closed, translate it. It usually means no further action under current evidence, not no further questions allowed. And the difference between those two definitions is where public outrage is born. Now, bring it back to the opening elevator scene. The detail is vivid, but the file behind it is what matters. Because a video without context can mislead as easily as it can reveal. And that's why the record, not the rumor, should lead. If you want, I can do this series in episodes. 1 case per video, 1 timeline per episode, and every claim tied to a documentable source. Because when facts lead, the mystery hits harder. And for families still searching, respect has to come first. These aren't campfire stories. They're real names, real grief, and real unanswered questions. So the only responsible way to watch is to think carefully and speak carefully. Now the final question. The one authorities can't always answer. If the official story is correct, why does the record leave so many clean gaps? And if the story isn't complete, what would it take to reopen it? Subscribe for real, documented cases. Evidence first and no fabricated details. Drop a case name you want analyzed, strictly from public records and official statements. And next time, we'll follow the paperwork, all the way to the silence.